Hey everybody, Chuck Fosberg here from Next Home, and today we've got Steve Kelly with us from All Western Mortgage, and he's going to help us understand what's going on in the mortgage market right now. There's been a lot of information in the news, and some of it's true, but most of it really isn't. So we're going to interview Steve today and get to the bottom of this. So good afternoon, Steve. How are you today? And thank you for joining us.
Great, Chuck. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Steve, we have a lot of trouble with lenders who are not in the state of Florida. And the problems that we have are typically just that they don't understand the rules and how we do transactions here in Florida. And also the customs, things, there's certain things that are customary in a transaction. And so they don't really know the laws here in Florida or the customs. And it causes a lot of difficulty. We've even seen people not get into their houses because a lender that's outside the state of Florida didn't know things that were turned out to be vital to know in order to be able to close the transaction. So we always recommend using a local lender, somebody that you can actually call and not have to go through the whole, dial 1 to get to this, press 2 for that and all this stuff. We think it's a lot better. And I know you do too, because you answer your phone, but I'm sure you've got lots of horror stories, and we're not looking to criticize anybody else, but we do want to protect people. And there are a lot of advantages to using someone that's intimately familiar with how we do things here in Florida. Isn't that true, Steve?
I believe so. And I can give you an example about myself. All right. So when I got started 30 years ago, I was in Atlanta. And when I moved after, I believe it was, I think I moved here in Florida about 21 years ago or so. So I was in Atlanta for about 9 years, and then I moved to Florida. And I remember sitting there, and I was going over the fees and stuff, and I figured, okay, and the insurance, and I gave this guy a nice low quote on insurance, saying, oh yeah. And one of my buddies hits me and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "What are you talking about? This is insurance, right? No big deal." Well, here in Florida, we have hurricanes, right? We need flood insurance. Insurance wasn't as expensive in Atlanta. So I'm understated. So I learned very quickly, hey, make sure what you're quoting. But there are people in other states that, they don't know. I mean, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and she had no idea that we had, Florida has 3 different taxes on a purchase. There's a transfer tax to the seller, which is 7%. Then there's intangible tax and doc stamp tax. That intangible is 2.2%, and then doc stamp is 0.35 or 3.5%, excuse me. And so these are the taxes, and those other 2 taxes go to the buyer. So you come from, say, like North Carolina, they don't even have those state taxes on there. So each state has their own little thing, not only for title fees, but they also have it for the taxes and some of the other things out there. And so, yeah, it's if you're sitting somewhere and trying to do multiple states, you need to be really well versed in that state to move forward. And then again, you may still not understand the situation. You still may not understand, hey, this is a sinkhole situation that's been remediated or something like that, or maybe you just want to steer clear of it. Or there's all sorts of little idiosyncrasies that we have here in Florida that are not in other states. And like, for instance, when Ian was coming in, right? When he got in the, as soon as he was named, well, we can't write mortgages if you don't have your insurance bound. So you get these other companies, they're just rocking and rolling, thinking they're going to go through it. And all of a sudden they're like, what do you mean we can't close? And nobody's alerted the buyer or the seller or anything like that, because they had no clue about hurricanes or tropical storms. So it is good to have somebody who is familiar with the area.
Yeah, we find that a lot with people who are moving here to Florida. They're very frustrated because real estate transactions can be dramatically different in one state to the next. And you would assume they're the same everywhere, but they're not. And it's a lot of the things are very state specific, like some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah. So I've found that it's given me an advantage sometimes when people can call me up, and if they've called one of these bigger companies, and every time they call, they get a different person, And then this different person has to either hear the story again or go read the notes to catch up. And then maybe they didn't care who quoted them what or whatever. With me, you're going to get the same guy every time. And you're going to get we're going to pick up right where we left off. And to be quite honest, I actually make a lot of friends with my customers too. It's kind of nice.
Oh, I'm sure you do, because you're so pleasant to work with.
Okay.
So I've got one more question on that, and then I'll tell our listeners a big secret about the value of who you choose as your mortgage person that nobody ever thinks of. But first, Steve, a lot of people, when they're looking for a mortgage, they just go to whatever bank where they do business and just go straight to that bank. Now, I know that there's a lot of differences between someone like yourself and a bank. So what are the advantages of going with a mortgage broker instead of an ordinary bank?
So in the mortgage side, there's kind of three different sections. There's the mortgage brokers, there's the bankers, right? And then there's the lenders and the correspondent lenders, and that's what we do. So as a correspondent lender, I'm able to broker, but I'm also able to lend our own money. And we have a warehouse line. I think we did about 2 billion or so last year as a company. And so but what we do is we underwrite and then sometimes we'll service the loan for a couple payments. So, and then we'll sell them. We're big enough that we're not just a little broker trying to do some correspondent time. We are a correspondent lender. And that gives me, we're all competing for rates. We all have about the same rates. But that gives me more control. I like it because I'm using the same underwriters all the time. Now, I did work for a bigger bank for a while, and I got to tell you, I really didn't like it because I was a number. Okay, not only my customer, but I tried to reach out to my underwriters and stuff, and they just treated me like you don't really, and that made it very hard for me to have any kind of control to get the deal done. And as a broker, brokers are great. I love brokers because I was a broker once too, and they will shop around and get all the different programs and different stuff, but they don't have the control because they're using different underwriters and different banks all the time. We are selling to different banks, but as a correspondent lender, I have that control. So I'm reaching out to those same underwriters all the time. We're working hand in hand, every day in and day out. And so I have a lot of control. Can get things done a lot faster. I literally had a deal one time that there was a big change at the very last minute, and the customers had nowhere to go. And it's like at 11:30 in the morning, and we were supposed to close that day. It was a Friday, and I cannot remember the change. It was years ago, but all I know is that I had to then get it back through underwriting, get it approved, get the docs out, the whole 9 yards in a couple hours, because the sellers had a cash back up 10,000 higher. They weren't going to extend. They were like, well, no, we're done with you. You close now or not. And the couple was a young couple with 2 little 3-year-old twins, and they had nowhere to go. So I just called the owner of my company, who's actually my boss. I report to him, and we're in like about 25 states or so. And I just said, I never call you, but this is what I need. And literally, I had all the other files got pushed aside. This one was pushed to the top. I had my approval, my docs, funding, everything done within about an hour and a half, and we were closing. We were right on time. So there's the control I had. As a broker, I don't have that control because they're like, yeah, we'd love to help you, but we have all these other files in front of you. And as a big bank, well, big banks are a nightmare. I'm sorry, but I used to have to tell people I need an extension when I sit down with them their very first interview. So that's not fun.
Wow, that's really informative. I didn't realize that myself. So that's a perfect segue into my little secret that almost nobody knows.
Oh boy, here we go.
So here's a little scenario. Let's say that I'm the listing agent, and Steve's going to be the buyer's lender. So when they put their offer in, experienced agents know which lenders are a pain in the butt and which ones aren't. So that's going to influence whether or not your offer gets accepted. And many times we've actually gone back and said, look, the seller will accept your offer, but you have to change lenders. which of course is a whole ordeal. And then let's say that it's a lender we're not familiar with. Part of my job as a listing agent is to make sure that we're as sure as can be that that thing's going to go all the way through to closing, because there's so many times where something goes wrong with the loan, it ends up not closing, then the seller has to start all over again with another buyer, and meanwhile all their plans are messed up. So that's a seller's biggest fear, is that they're not going to close. And most of the time it's a problem with the mortgage that causes it to not close. So here's what I do as a listing agent, and any other competent listing agent's going to do this as well, is pick up the phone and call the lender. Now, if it's someone like Steve, he's going to pick up the phone. We're going to have a discussion about the buyer. He's going to assure me that everything's okay. We can talk about how far along they are in the process. You know, there's certain things he can't disclose, of course, because it's private. But as professionals, we can discuss the likelihood of it closing. And also that's giving me an assurance that as we go through this process, there are a lot of times where information needs to be exchanged or a question comes up. And it's a lot easier if you've got one person you can call and they pick up the phone. So as a listing agent, we have to inform our seller about all this. It's like, hey, look, this guy never even called me back. Whereas this other offer that we've got, that guy, he actually picked up the phone, he answered all my questions. I feel pretty good about him. So which offer would you accept? So that's one thing that almost nobody knows, it because it all happens behind the scenes. But your choice of lender is way more important than you think it is. It's not just important for all the obvious stuff. It can actually affect whether or not your offer gets accepted, or if you have to go on down to the next one and try your luck with somebody else.
You know, I've seen that myself. Yeah, I've gotten those calls several times, and I mean, we're with All Western Mortgage, right? And we're based out of Vegas, so we're not huge here in Florida, but we're growing, and we're looking for loan officers as well. Right now, we're hiring like crazy. Even though everybody thinks the market's bad, I am hiring. So, but yeah, it's a thing I've had happen to me a few times, where more than a few times, where the selling agent who doesn't know who I am, never heard of my company, calls me up and wants to talk to me. And I love that, because then I get a chance to talk to another realtor, obviously. And obviously I'm not going to discuss anything about their personal information, but I can tell them this is a very, I can say this is a very strong buyer, or this is not a problem. We're going to move forward and I don't see any issues. Or if I do see some issues, I'll be like, we have a couple hurdles, but they're not hard to accomplish, and we'll just move forward. And they all like that, especially when you just give them, you know, the honest truth.
Yeah, and I think one thing that a lot of folks don't realize is that the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the lender, and also other people involved, once a deal is made, we all come together, and it's all of our job to get that person into that house. And the more we work together and the more we can communicate with each other, the easier the whole thing's going to be for everybody involved. And I'd also like to point out, here's another tip for you guys that are watching. I've worked with Steve many times where we have the buyer. So what we do is we kind of circumvent the whole thing. Is we'll ask Steve, hey, Steve, would you mind giving this listing agent a call? And, you know, somebody, when you're working one-on-one with a lender, they'll say, yes, yeah, I'll give that person a call. And I'll tell you, people are blown away because nobody does that. And once they hear from the lender before they even have to call them, they know they're dealing with a real professional.
Yeah, you're right. It always shocks them, you know?
Yeah. I've had so many people call me on deals that we've worked on, Steve, and just like, I can't believe it. I already heard from the lender. I didn't even call him yet.
And and you've helped me with a lot of that, because, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm crunching numbers and doing my thing and talking to the customer, I'm talking to you. And so I love it when you say, hey, give the listing agent a call too, because I'll try to, but sometimes if I'm doing something, I'm like, oh, let me call them now, because they're going to be part of this whole deal. And I like even to tell the buyers, I'm like, you know, when I start the process, I'm like, look, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to accomplish the same goal. We all have our different.
So true.
Yeah. So different
And
motivations.
there's some
all try to
folks
be
that
there.
don't work that way, but it doesn't matter what the business is. There's always a few. But you're right. All of our job is to get people into houses.
Yeah,
That's what we're
change
all
their
about.
lives.
Yeah. Steve, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's awesome. And we really appreciate the benefit of your 30 years of experience as a mortgage loan officer. And thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Now, just in case people want to get hold of you, how can people get a hold of you, Steve?
Well, Chuck, first of all, I really appreciate it too. Thank you. And the best way to reach me is on my cell. I mean, I know there's a lot of different ways. Best way is on my cell, 727-415-1842. You can text me, call me, evenings, weekends. In fact, I do a lot on evenings, weekends, because that's when people aren't working. That's when they're best time. So 727-415-1842. You can email me. A lot of people like to email. S for Steve, S Kelly, Kelly, at allwestern.com. So S Kelly at allwestern.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on all the social media. So, I mean, there's a million ways to catch us now. Just pick up the phone, it's free. Give me a shout. Let's go over what you got, and I'll do everything I can to help.
That sounds really great. Thank you again, Steve. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Chuck. I really appreciate it.